everyone to the July 27th Save Tualatin work session. First item up for tonight is our Tualatin 2040 implementation update. I'm assuming, is this Steve and Sherilyn and Karen?
Aquila.
Aquila, all right.
Karen and Tabitha, yeah.
I'll hand it over to Aquila.
Thank you, Mayor. If the host could be so kind as to allow screen sharing, please.
You're good to go.
Thank you. All right. Well, good evening, Council and Mayor. My name is Steve Coper, Planning Manager, and I'm here to present an update on the Tualatin 2040 implementation. As mentioned, I'm here with Aquila Hurd-Ravitch, Community Development Director, who's going to start off the presentation.
Great, thank you. So we're here tonight to give you an update of where we're at now and what's coming up for you. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about what's coming up for your presentation tonight.
Are we on slide 2 now?
Yes, please.
What slide are we on now?
It's showing 1.
Oh, it shows 2 on my end.
There we go.
Let me just see if I can go back and, is it still showing 2?
It's showing 2, yeah.
Well, it looks like it won't. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. So we'll talk a little bit about where we've been, so how we got to where we are today. Steve will go over a timeline and some comprehensive plan basics, and then talking about the housing update to the comp plan, and there's been a few other updates, plus we'd like to talk to you about public outreach and what that looks like and what some of the next steps are. And there is always time for question and answer. So if we, perfect. All right, so where we have been, you guys have seen this graphic presented before. You know, the city has gone through a visioning process with Tualatin Tomorrow, and then we launched into modernizing the code. And through that modernization, a couple of emerging topics came out, needing a housing needs analysis and an economic opportunities analysis. And so that we completed that work, and that work lended to doing a policy prioritization. So where we are today then is in that green box, and what we're about to embark on. So what we need to do is to adopt the housing needs analysis into the comprehensive plan. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and why it's important and what that looks like. And essentially it ends up becoming a chapter in our comprehensive plan, which we don't have an exclusive chapter dedicated to housing right now. And then as part of that, we will end up doing a graphic update and kind of reorganization of the comp plan. The reason why we are doing that at this time is because there are housing policies distributed throughout the comprehensive plan. So we're going to bring those together into one chapter. We're going to update those to reflect the work of Tualatin 2040. And then we need to kind of clean up how the comp plan, what it looks like, how it reads, because we will be taking pieces of it. So we need to make it whole. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve to talk through the timeline.
Thanks, Aquila. So I think that we've showed this timeline before, but for the purposes of tonight's discussion, we're going to focus on the portion of the timeline that's within the blue box. So we're here to present on the housing update to the comprehensive plan, which we've already started in earnest, but we're here to provide you an update on where we're going next. Before I go on, I should also just acknowledge that this is a team effort. So Aquila is providing the overall guidance for the project, and then I'm the project manager for the project. We also have Tabitha Boschetti, assistant planner, who's working on the project, Aaron Engman, associate planner, and then Karen Pearl Fox, who's here tonight, also will be working on subsequent phases of the project. So basically what we're proposing to do is to tackle first the housing update to the comprehensive plan. In subsequent phases, we'll be looking at the development code and then developing a housing strategy. The one thing I should note on this point is that we have received a grant for consultant assistance on those portions of the project. And so the timeline has changed a little bit from what you may have seen last time. So the timeline roughly, here we are at the council presentation. I'll show it in a little greater detail in subsequent slides, but basically what we're going to be doing is working with our planning commission over the course of the next few months, as well as soliciting feedback from folks who are interested parties from the earlier part of the Tualatin 2040 project, Citizen Advisory Council members and other members of the public to get input on the changes, like Aquila mentioned, updating the comprehensive plan to create a single housing element and incorporate pieces of the 2019 housing needs analysis. So just before I get a little further into the details of the timeline, I just wanted to go back and talk about comp plan basics. And so this slide was actually created because when we had done a prior presentation for the Planning Commission, they kind of wanted to know a little bit more about the comprehensive plan. They're familiar with the operation of it, but just kind of why does it exist and what does it do, what's it for? And so obviously the first part is that we're required by Oregon state law to have one, which of course is not a completely satisfying answer. There's a lot more nuance and a lot more good reasons other than just complying with the law to have one. What it does is it forms the basis for our zoning code, which influences basically how the city looks from an aesthetic perspective. And it sets and enshrines community standards. And I'll go back to that community standards and community vision element in subsequent slides. But so what does it do? Like I said, communicates that vision and goals, provides specific policies that are designed to implement those visions and goals. And so you see a flow through where you have a vision from the community, policies and goals, and then eventually it makes its way into the development code, which affects individual development through regulations. And then what else does it do? It provides a framework for land use and then other things that are essentially related to land development, infrastructure, resource conservation, which I know is a value that's important to the council, economic development, public services like water and sewer, and so forth. So that's why we have a comp plan. In kind of a nutshell, what does it do? And so then we turn to the next question, which is why are we updating our comprehensive plan? And so as Aquila mentioned, we're providing a housing element. We're taking various housing related chapters that are found kind of spread out through the comprehensive plan currently and putting it together in one spot. That was something that we heard from the public that was a desire to have an actual housing element. It's similar to what's provided in other communities in the metro region, our surrounding neighbors, and so forth. And I think is just a best practice in the profession as well. And so as I'll show in the next slide, we're taking the community's vision and goals and articulating them more clearly, communicating them to the public, communicating them to developers, and so forth. And then what else is being updated? So at the same time, because in almost a domino ripple effect, because the housing element is spread across multiple chapters, we're being forced to reorganize the plan to start with. And so in the sense that it just makes sense to look at the plan overall and reorganize it in a way that makes sense without actually touching the policies themselves. There was just synergy around it, and it's, I think, a low hanging fruit that will provide a much better product in the whole, even though really our focus is that housing element. And I'll show kind of an example of what that looks like in a subsequent slide. Did you have anything to add here, Aquila?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about, a little bit more about why update it. So there's kind of three main things that come to my mind when we're thinking about how we as a city can affect housing and have a positive effect on housing. One thing that we should keep in mind is that what we have heard from our Tualatin 2040 community group, the community advisory group, and even before that started, we heard a lot of community input about needing one place in our comprehensive plan that really laid out our policies. What are the city's policies toward housing? And so this project is kind of that first step in realizing that, in bringing all those policies together in one place and creating that housing chapter or element, however you want to speak to it. And then when we have that all in one place, as Steve had pointed out before, it makes it, I don't want to say easier, but we have now a foundation upon which we can update our actual codes. So then we have our residential codes that talk about what type of housing can be built where and what standards we want to see. And those codes need to be based on policy. And so when we lay those two things out between the policies and then the codes, it presents a very clear direction to developers and others who are interested in housing in our community about what it is we expect to see as a city, what we're looking for, and that ends up being built upon between the development code and the comprehensive plan update. So that's why this first step is an important step in our progress toward providing, just being a good steward of housing opportunities in the city. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Aquila. And so just to build on Aquila's comments, I've taken an example here and shown a general objective that's from our current comprehensive plan. And so that was last updated in 2001, hasn't been updated since. And so we have, a fairly unobjectionable, but perhaps a little bit vague policy around providing housing opportunities. We, of course, did community visioning most recently in 2014, where our vision for the future is increasing housing choices through, as Aquila mentioned, our community advisory committee in the Planning Commission and Council as well. We came up with the policy priorities from 2019, where we stated as a policy priority as a city a greater diversity of housing types. We got even more specific in the actual housing needs analysis, where we said ensure development of broader diversity of housing types, including those missing middle types. And then an action statement kind of further building on that strategy statement, talking about encouraging opportunities for mixed use development. And so of course the council, I think, succeeded at that with the recent adoption of the mixed use commercial zone, and then turning to the other part of the action statement, allowing and encouraging development of these other housing types, missing middle housing types, duplexes, cottage clusters, townhomes, and so forth in specifically low density residential zones. And so you kind of see here where there's been, I think, over the past 5-6 years and beyond, a clear statement or clear articulation going back to that idea of what's the community's vision and what are the community's goals. And then we have essentially a comprehensive plan that hasn't been updated to meet those. And so while the community has been very clearly, I would state, articulating what its goals are in a very clear, concise fashion, the comprehensive plan doesn't communicate that to the development community, and it doesn't provide a framework for the development code to be updated consistent with that. And so that's kind of an example of why we would be doing it. And so just to take it a little further, here's another comprehensive plan where we would take the housing strategy, which was part of the 2019 housing needs analysis, and this will fill in some of the other goals and objectives in the comprehensive plan, where the housing strategy is identify funding tools to support residential development, and then we have a comprehensive plan policy that's supportive of that. So again, it communicates to affordable housing developers that we are a community that supports affordable housing, which is something that the comprehensive plan does not clearly articulate at this point. And then kind of turning away from the housing for just a moment, we talked a little bit about updating the comprehensive plan, reorganizing it. And so this portion of the project, I think, is analogous to the Tualatin Development Code Improvement Project, where we didn't change the substance of the development code at that time, but we reorganized it and reformatted it in a way that was easier to read and easier to understand. And so what this is an example of is taking the existing comprehensive plan that has objectives and then reorganizing it in a similar fashion to the housing element, the housing chapter, where there are goals and then policies that are identified to implement those goals, as opposed to a little bit more vague objectives. I think this also provides, and I know that there are some other chapters in the comprehensive plan. Of course, we all as staff recently have visited with the new council placemat. And so looking in the comprehensive plan, there are certainly chapters in there that are a little bit out of date relative to some of those priorities. And so I think just in the longer term planning fashion, this sets the stage for those to be updated in the future. Again, not at this point. This is that almost policy neutral, where we're not changing the policies in here. We're just putting them in a way that, again, for the development community and others who might use this document, easier to read. Turning away from the text to the graphic update that we mentioned. So I will preface this by kind of saying that the housing element is the focus of this update. It happens to be that we have graphic design expertise within our staff. And so lucky for us, this becomes also a form of low-hanging fruit. And so we're not paying a consultant, or not doing anything than utilizing existing staff. But I think that you can get the gist from this slide, where we have a comprehensive plan that looks like a development code. And then this is an example of what the comprehensive plan could be, with a nice cover, table of contents. And again, I think going on that theme of leveraging existing resources and attacking low-hanging fruit, we're simply applying the branding, the colors, the fonts, and so forth that we have from the 2015 branding guidelines. And so we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just essentially bringing this up to what we do with all the rest of our documents in the city, like the Parks Master Plan, and so forth. And then the other thing on that kind of same vein is that for the photography, we're utilizing existing photography that we've already had taken and paid for as a city. So again, kind of that theme of making use of our resources. So here's just one more example of the graphic update, where we take kind of what's otherwise fairly, I think, bland text and give it a little bit of, give it a single photo at the beginning of the chapter to kind of invite the reader in. We've knocked out an objective or a goal on the inset to the chapter to kind of give the reader a flavor for what's in there. The whole idea behind this is, again, just making the comprehensive plan more user-friendly and more engaging and easier to use. And again, similarly, more clearly articulating the goals and visions of the community. Finally, turning to the public outreach approach. So we're working away on updating our website. We have met with the Planning Commission. We met with them on July 16th to kind of go over in broad strokes this. We essentially presented a similar presentation. And so they're going to work on reviewing and providing input for this update. And then they in turn will provide a recommendation to you as the council. We're also going to invite the 12 and 2040 CAC members and then the other interested parties who were interested in housing before and I'm sure are still interested to also join in and review and provide input on the update to the housing element. We'll be noting the status of this project at the annual cost burden housing event that's coming up in fall. If the CIOs do have an annual meeting, we'll be happy to be there to present the update that we have at that time. And then, like I said, the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to council, and then the City Council would ultimately adopt this just like any other plan text amendment similar to ones that you've seen recently. We'd go through that process. So just to drill in a little more to the next steps with regard to the Planning Commission. So our plan for engagement with the TPC is to review the draft housing element on August 20th. Like I said, we're underway. We have a lot of it really in good shape because of that recent housing needs analysis. We're really fortunate to not have waited very long to put the housing needs analysis into the comprehensive plan. And then on September 17th, we would meet with the Planning Commission just to review, obviously, any feedback they had on the draft housing element, and then have them look over the remainder of the comp plan and kind of the organization. And then we would put those two pieces together with a final draft for their review and recommendation on October 15th. We have a placeholder here to reconvene with you as the council on December 7th of 2020 as a hearing to adopt. I think that we may want to return with a work session prior to that, just to give you all a teaser of what's to come, but I just wanted to put at least one date for the time being. And I think the only other thing to add is just that this kind of, to go back to that blue box in the timeline, this is just the first leg of the project. And so we'll also have, as I mentioned, we were awarded grant for consultant assistance on House Bill 2001, which is the missing middle House Bill, and then House Bill 2003, which is a housing production strategy, the how do we get people to build the missing middle housing piece of the question. And so we're working right now with the State Department of Land Conservation and Development and the consultant teams. There are two different consultant teams, one for each. And so we will also expect to return to council with an update on that portion of the project, probably sometime later this summer or in early fall as well. And with that, like Aquila said, we're here and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right. So Steve, if you can, we'll try to do this because you might be popping back and forth to your presentation, so be prepared.
No problem.
Anybody have questions? Valerie.
Oh, I wondered, you said you got a grant for a consultant assistant, and I wondered what the consultant will be assisting with.
So yeah, and like I said, we'll come back with more details about it, and so I'll just kind of cover it in broad strokes if that's okay. But so House Bill 2001 requires cities, particularly in the metro area, to adopt missing middle development code provisions. So essentially, with this comp plan update, we're kind of teeing up the comp plan to be ready for that. And so those need to be adopted by July of 2022. And so the consultant is in look for areas that we need to update the code to be consistent with that House bill. And then we'll go through essentially a similar cycle of working with the Planning Commission, working with the Community Advisory Committee and interested parties, and then ultimately culminating in a plan text amendment to update the development code. And then the House Bill 2003 piece, the housing production strategy, it's a little bit different and unique because it's not something that there's really an example of, I suppose. And so essentially what it is that it's an economics analysis. It takes a lot of what we did in the housing needs analysis as far as both code and non-code barriers to creation of affordable housing. And then basically the culmination of that is a report that has suggestions on approaches that we as a city can take to reduce those barriers.
Thanks. And then I had one more question really quick. Is just, I didn't know what cost burden housing means exactly.
Oh, so I'm sorry, we used the name Under One Roof last year. And so because Tualatin starting last year is identified as a rent burdened community. In other words, more than 25% of its residents pay more than 30% of their family income towards rent. The state, there's another House bill called House Bill 4006 that requires us to hold an annual event and do outreach to those communities to try to help identify what resources they can be put in touch with to assist with some of those struggles, like things, for example, like temporary rental assistance, like to get someone by month to month and things like that. And so we'll be doing one again this year. It's going to have a little bit of a different flavor. Karen Pearl Fox is working on that very diligently, and it's going to have, which I'm really excited about, it's going to have a health component to it, which I think is, particularly in light of COVID, a really important element in regards to folks that are struggling with rent.
Steve, this is Maria. So thank you for the presentation. It was really, really well done and I understand it now. Like I remember the first time I saw this comprehensive plan, I was like, it's not comprehensive for me. But now, like having been over and seeing these more and more, it was well done. And my question is, was this part? I remember you all took some did some outreach last year and asked people which kind of homes they would like to see. Is this the results from those kinds of surveys we did?
Yeah, and so it's essentially implementing that. We've now identified that that's what the community's perspective is. And so we're essentially codifying it, like Aquila mentioned, to basically communicate to people from outside of the city especially, but even those inside the city that may not be familiar with Tualatin as a community, of what the city's values are.
And I remember some people talking, and I remember this at one of our outreach meetings, with whether people wanted to update the zoning. Was that is that all included? And I know you presented, but I just want to make sure that that's what we're talking about.
No worries at all. So this is the first part of that. The zoning is kind of the second phase of the project. So if you had that blue box on the timeline, the zoning is outside of the blue box, but it's still within the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bridget?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I first of all want to say that I think that it's going to be so much more user-friendly how the layout is. It's makes a lot of sense to me to have. I'm an old-fashioned outline type of a person, so to have everything in sections that I can understand and that you know, inductive and deductive thinkers can both utilize, I think is going to be really helpful to a lot of different people, including developers and just everybody that wants to understand where the goals and vision of the city are and how to meet them. I'm also pleased that we're addressing the missing middle conversation, rent burden conversations, and the, you know, livability issues that are going to be probably even more apparent as time goes on with COVID. So I'm curious when you said about the numbers about rent burden folks, if we have those statistics and that we can look at those in context, especially when there's going to be probably a big dip with, or increase, depending on how you want to look at it, with COVID, and then when we come back. And I just think it would be good for us to understand that really well as a city, so that we cope well and that we put resources towards people that need them in a way that we can. And just even in other conversations that we have coming up. So that information from the county.
In the context of the rent burden event, it's the state that provides it to us.
Okay.
Like they identify us as a rent burden community. I'll have to get back to you on that if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Where the data comes from and just whether or not there's a way to keep apprised from an updated source.
Yeah, it would be good to have those statistics for our city pulled out so that we can see how we're doing, and especially during this time, because it's probably going to have some extreme, and we want to be able to tackle it. At the same time, we want to know what our norms are. And then my other, and I like the, like I said, I like the design and the imagery and all of it, and appreciate all the work, and I'm excited about this. I have two concerns. One is, and I know that we're focusing on one particular thing, but as we increase density, how does that couple together with our transportation planning? And my other question is, and you did kind of point to it, but I'm curious about, especially with the emails that we got recently about trees being taken down for development, what the environmental impact statements are, not only from the land use perspective, but also from things that we can do to make housing units more green. Like I know some cities have plugins built in for cars because it's a lot cheaper to build them while you're building, and those kinds of efforts. And I'm just curious about how that all fits.
Sure. Do you mind if I at least take a stab at answering your questions, or did you want?
No, those are the two questions I have. No, I totally want to hear what you have to say.
So, I mean, I think that your analysis of the increased density and the transportation issues is spot on. In the context of the missing middle housing bill, I think that conflict was brought to the attention of the legislators early on, and as a result, that bill and the implementation of it is exempt from transportation analysis. And so I think that that's something that we would really need to tackle as a city. I think that we've started to sketch out in broad terms a potential transportation system update, and so I think that that's timely information to feed into that. I think that also just speaks to the idea of, looking at, and I know the city's doing this, but just to continue to push the envelope on mass transit. So, I mean, I think the answer is that that's something that the city's going to have to undertake on its own, because the state is essentially saying that they're not going to examine specifically the burden of missing middle housing. It's a little bit hard to follow because the state has passed this law in order to increase missing middle housing, but then I think that there's some opinion that it's not going to create a great traffic impact, but then it's also hard to understand how does it actually result in moving the needle on affordability if it's not going to. And so I don't know, we can put our heads together and maybe talk a little bit more about that at a future meeting. But that's I guess the initial answer that I would have is that it's exempt, and that we need to have a further conversation if that's something that the council's interested in. And then the the second question on environmental impacts. So, I mean, yeah, I certainly been following the news, as it sounds like you have as well, in terms of, requirements in building codes of certain things. I know some communities in California are talking about going primarily electric and going away from natural gas, like you mentioned, the car chargers, things like that. I think that, there is the possibility to explore those at the local level. I think, I don't know that I'm aware, and I'd have to confer with our building official, because he meets with the other building officials across the state regularly, whether or not that's something that is done in Oregon. To the best of my knowledge, most communities typically follow the Oregon building codes, and they don't deviate a great deal individually, city by city. But that is, I think, something that the city has within its power to do.
Yeah, I understand there's some initiatives in Hillsborough, and I'm not sure where else. So I do know that some cities have initiatives. I don't know exactly the design of them, but it's something I'm interested and curious about having the conversation around.
Okay,
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah, we can research it a little further. Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thanks again for all your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And Aquila, a great presentation, very well thought out. I think in part, your job, Steve, is easier because of the previous work that other staff members have done and the community has done in putting this plan together. So a couple of comments. I'm concerned about how, and you touched on it, Steve, how do we get developers to build that missing middle? And it's a concern I have, because we've built one development already that is basically a typical Tualatin cookie cutter. We're in the process of going through having another one built that will have very little, if any, missing middle. I believe Gordon Root has a small percentage of townhomes that are going to be a part of his development, but nothing significant. I would like staff to come up, if it's at all humanly possible, that how do we incentivize developers to build that kind of housing that is what's needed here in Tualatin. On the traffic side, I was a little, and I've expressed my displeasure with several legislators about basically punting down the road that any traffic problems they're going to create. That said, we know from some of the magic that Mr. Fox has done in our community in solving some issues. And the best example to me is over by Tualatin High School, the problem with that intersection at Boones Ferry Road and Ibuck, and the simple task of just starting that crosswalk early has seen, and it's gone away now because there's no school, but in the short period of time that he did fix that issue, it was an amazing fix. And he's done some other things in some other areas to really improve on transportation. So I think you're just going to have to take it to task and understand that we'll have to figure out how to fix the transportation issue, but I'm comfortable that we can fix the transportation issue, because it's important to get that missing middle. It is really important, and we need to figure out a way to incentivize that building. And whether it's revisiting SDCs, working with the state on some kind of tax credits for these builders, whatever that might be, if you can come up with a way, I'll be forever grateful, my friend. And that's the only comment that I have to make, is let's figure out a way to make this happen and make it work within our community as we open up new areas, both in Basalt Creek and down the road in Stafford.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I think that, based on what I'm hearing from the council, I'm actually looking forward to the House Bill 2001 and 2003 presentation that we'll be doing, because we'll be getting into some of these issues in greater detail. And so I think that those are great comments, and we'll look forward to talking about them more.
Other questions or comments? Okay, I just have a couple, Steve. So are we having to do any rework on this project? Because you're saying, we're working on this first, and then the consultants will come in and a little bit of time and start focusing it on 2001 to 2003, do we have to go back then? And then you were saying there's going to be a PTA to do some updates to something we just fixed?
So I guess I'll put it this way: is that we did the 2019 housing needs analysis. We were aware, of course, late in the time that House Bill 2001 was coming through. I think that obviously the rulemaking for it hasn't even been completed yet, and so we don't know for sure exactly what it's going to look like, and we really didn't know then. And so we did our housing needs analysis based on the best available information at that time. We're going to implement the comprehensive plan based on the best available information that we have at the time. I think that to the extent that the development code audit, so our hope is that the consultant who's coming on board shortly, in doing the development code audit early enough, will hopefully catch some of our potential quagmires that we can be kind of nimble and jump on now. I think the other component of it is that even if we have to slightly tweak the comp plan in the future to get what the community wants out of the missing middle housing, I still think that it's worthwhile and worthwhile to do it now. The other piece of it, which I didn't mention, which is kind of technical, is that because the planning period in the housing needs analysis covers 2020 to 2040, thus the Tualatin 2040 name. The state DLCD wants us to at least send an intent to adopt the HNA this year to preserve that planning period. And so that's kind of why we're jumping on this and getting on it right away rather than waiting.
Okay, so you're not envisioning any significant rework. You're envisioning probably just some tweaks, augmenting some things based on what the consultants come back with.
That would be the hope. I mean, I think from what we've seen from our housing needs analysis and what we've seen from missing middle housing, I mean, going back to that slide where we talked about allowing duplexes and cottage clusters in a low density zone, that's like exactly what House Bill 2001 is suggesting. And so it's hard to understand, it's hard to see from where I sit now without the benefit of the adopted final rules, how a comprehensive plan policy, which is designed to provide some flexibility in how it's implemented, would be out of whack with a future development code provision.
Right. And just the second thing, I sent an email, and a lot of people haven't had a chance yet. The HBA did have a virtual tour of the modern middle housing. And going back to what Paul was saying, they didn't need to be incentivized for some of that development. It was market driven. The cities didn't have to do anything. They just built and sold right away. So I do ask if you have a chance. It is a terrific video from HBA on some of the ideas they've done. Of course, a lot of them are Portland centric on reusing existing lots, but there is some new development they talk about, which is what we're looking at versus infill, of cottage clusters, condos, townhomes that were made, to Council Brooks's point, environmentally friendly. They were affordable and they sold. And the cities didn't have to do anything. It was just the market is now driving that. So ideally, that could happen here in the future. That's why I'm looking forward to the consultant's report on the missing middle. On what do we need to do, or is it going to be market driven? Because some of these ideas that the home builders have are terrific. When you see these things and they're actually not just drawings, you actually see the actual cottage cluster idea in real life, you're like, wow, this does work. And people are attracted to it. And last thing is on traffic, like Council Morrison was saying, I think part of the issue we're going to have is, these edicts came down from the state on greater density, but when you have existing neighborhoods, how do you go back and fix the roads? How do you go back and fix the sewer pipe? And that's what a lot of cities in their predicament of where these start getting placed, their existing infrastructure isn't there. We're kind of in a good spot where our development in the South, where we know this is coming. And I've had questions, in the past about, are we going to make sure the pipes are a little bit bigger than we think, stuff like that because of this requirement. But there is, if you will, not, I wouldn't call it, it's kind of like an unfunded, what they call it, unfunded mandate that these things come down from the state, but we have to figure out how to pay for it. I know one of the biggest people or organizations there is really afraid is Clean Water Services because they've got whole of their service area that their pipes are not big enough for this. And so if there's any kind of infill or redevelopment, they're going to have to dig up a whole bunch of pipes. And what's the impact on rates and ratepayers? So enough of that, I guess. So ideally, I'm looking forward to the consultants report. Looking forward to this because we've been hearing loud and clear that our zoning and the way our planning is done here in the city is so old and out of date. We need to become more modern and nimble and be able to tell developers this is the kind of development we want in town. And here's our standard, bring that here and it'll sell. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys for the input. Thank you.
All right, so moving on to item 2 tonight is the 2021 legislative agenda for the League of Oregon Cities.
Yes, Megan's gonna walk you through that.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. My name is Megan George. I'm the assistant to the city manager for the city of Tualatin. Like the mayor said, I'm talking about the 2021 legislative agenda for the League of Oregon Cities. In your packet, you've got a few items. I don't have a presentation today, so I'll just kind of talk through it, but you've got those items in your packet to reference as well. So the LOC, the League of Oregon City, asks for input on our legislative priorities every 2 years. These priorities they adopt and end up informing the upcoming long session and short session. So they work on a 2-year rotating basis. They work through a policy committee process where they have different policy committees gather on different topics to meet with representatives from state departments and other issue area experts. Talk about different policy ideas, things that have come up in previous sessions, and then formulate proposals for issues that they may want to take forward to the larger membership of the League of Oregon Cities. Our own Don Hudson served as the chair of the Finance Committee, and Councillor Kellogg served on 2 committees, I believe the Telecom Committee and the Transportation Committee this last round. But there are elected and appointed officials from around the state. I think each committee has maybe 15, 20 different individuals, so they're quite robust groups really that meet. And through their time, they meet 3 or 4 times, depending on the committee. They put forward a list of issues, and that's what you see in the packet in front of you. Each committee has submitted several different issues that they themselves have prioritized for consideration by the larger membership. And then from there, it gets sent out to all of the member cities, which is, of course, 241 cities in the state of Oregon. And cities have an opportunity to vote on their own priorities. So based on direction from the city council, staff took a look at the issue areas that were sent along by the League of Oregon Cities and prioritized 4 different issues. So what we did is we attached, you can see the ranking. We decided to weed out a couple of issue areas that we felt were issues that have long existed, such as property taxes, which I believe have been an identified priority for the League of Oregon Cities for at least 15 years. At this point. But in addition to that, we also included priorities related to the COVID-19 recovery efforts because we felt that those would be a priority for many cities and many other organizations and stakeholders who are involved in the legislative process. So we wanted to make sure that we used our votes essentially on issues that were specific to Tualatin and important for that reason. So we did that in 2 groupings. So the first grouping, there are the top 4 issues. Mostly those have to do with local control or home rule, which of course is a huge issue for the League of Oregon Cities and one of the topics that most cities in Oregon can agree on. There are others, but that seems to be the most important. And then second to that, there are additional priorities that were relevant to the city of Tualatin and had to do with funding issues. So the top 4 issues that we picked, they have a letter that they're assigned to and kind of a heading. I'll just quickly review them. So the first was expedited siting for shelter and affordable housing. This is definitely a local control issue, but it would allow cities to proactively identify places where shelters can be sited rather than allowing shelters to be sited anywhere, withholding that. So the second one was number Q or letter Q, mental health service delivery. So within this issue area, there were quite a few different proposals, including providing investment or resources essentially to support this, parity for insurance between physical health and mental health, decriminalization, and several others. The third area was letter R, municipal broadband and municipal pole protection, classic local control issues. There are cities who are interested in providing their own internet service. I believe Hillsborough is one of the more recent interested parties. And so this would preserve that local control for cities to be able to do that. The last then that ended up on our list was letter W, right-of-way or franchise fees authority preservation. Again, this is a local control issue. There's two areas that it seems that there's potential regulation coming to create a statewide right-of-way access policy and then to limit the charge of fees for other government organizations. And so this would be asking for local governments, cities to have power to make choices that are most relevant or make sense for our communities. And so those were the four issues that staff determined made sense to include as the top priority. So from here, what we're looking for, the deadline to respond to the League of Oregon Cities is August 9th. So all cities typically meet with their councils and submit those priorities via an online ballot. And then the intergovernmental relations team sits down and reviews it and provides a recommendation to the board of directors. The board of directors will then meet, either accept the recommendation as proposed by the intergovernmental relations team or make changes. And then that will become the issue areas that they will focus on for the upcoming session. We discussed that they, in addition to that like one shooter that you'll typically see them pass out, all of the issue areas that the policy committee has developed through this time are things that the lobbyists will look at and focus on during their time. And many of the connections and stories and experiences that they heard as part of the policy committee process will be things that they'll be able to use as part of their lobbying efforts. So the process comprehensively really informs the outcomes that they get. So with that, the question for you all today is what direction you would like to give us in submitting that ballot for Tualatin. So again, attached, there's the one sheeter, which includes the recommendations that staff outlined. And so we have identified the top 4 priorities as well as a set of secondary priorities, and then included additional comments. So we provided quite a bit of feedback. But there, I think, are 24 different issue areas, one for each letter of the alphabet. So if you have questions or comments, as you discuss, I'll take notes to make sure we can capture that as part of our official ballot.
Thanks, Megan. All right, open to the floor. Bridget has her hand up first. Bridget.
Thank you for your work on this. And in the secondary priorities, I do think that local climate action planning resources are important, and long-term transportation infrastructure funding is important to our area. I just want to weigh in a little bit on those, and not to take away anything, and I'm not going to get into a heavy debate about all this, but that I just want to put my 2 cents in, and I appreciate the work and the time that you've taken on this. Thanks, Megan.
Paul.
I'll go next because I know one of my comments is definitely in the minority, and so you can kind of forget about it, Megan. We can move on. But I also wanted to go next because I agree with Councilor Brooks on the climate. I'm not quite, to me, I don't know how to phrase this without like really saying something wild and crazy. If we don't keep making it a priority, then no one takes it seriously, and no one will take it seriously until we make it a priority. And I think it's something that needs to be worked on. The other, and the rest is, and again, as Councilor Brooks said, great job in organizing this. And I already know you guys are really good because you did a great job on the outlook for Clackamas County, and there were a lot of choices there. And I thought you did a terrific job in organizing that. But the comment I want to make real quickly here is, number one, the best way to lower your revenue is to raise taxes. And so the beer and cider and the marijuana tax, to me, is if you want less revenue, then work on seeing if you can get it raised. The second comment I want to make is with respect to right-of-way franchise. We've already seen this from basically from Verizon and some others. If you charge high fees, then they just move on to another city and ignore you. And so to me, those are not as important. But the rest, the transportation, I think, is important. And then you had the shelter and affordable housing is obviously extremely critical. And I think most of it, and I get you can't make everything number one, and you kind of highlighted what needed to be highlighted. And if we want to play, checkers and move the pieces around a little bit, that's fine. And if we don't, that's fine. Because I know at the end of the day, I forget how many cities I've been on those conference calls on Fridays, and Frank, maybe you remember, but it's over 200 cities are getting this, and so we're not going to break bread, so to speak, on anything. But that's kind of my sense of where we are.
Right. Other comments? Robert.
Yeah, thanks. Just in defense of items R and W, I was a member of that committee, and the idea that in some other states, the big telecoms have come in and actually prohibited municipal ownership of broadband networks. And while we're not talking about that today in Tualatin, I certainly don't want to foreclose the possibility in the future, seeing what they've done out in Hillsborough. Sandy is putting together a network. I think Forest Grove is on track to. And to see what happens with those and to see if it's a good way to bring what I consider a utility to every person in town. I don't want to foreclose that possibility. So I'd strongly support R, or keep the support for R. The same thing with W, even though that's a federal issue, and I know the league is already engaged in litigation on preserving the ability to charge right-of-way fees and the small cell locator fees. That's also an important one to fight for. One that was not on the list that I thought would be a good one for us is the local speed setting authority. Numerous times over the years, we've gotten comments from citizens saying they're too fast on my road, and we have to throw up our hands and say, well, we can't change the speed limit. That's a state law issue. And as the narrative in the document we received indicates, there was a bill last session that was almost guaranteed approval, but the time clock ran out when certain people left the legislature. And so, I think as a short-term priority, whether it's a 1 or a 2, I would like to see that, us express our support for, because it's something that we can do, relates to local authority, and will make significant local improvements.
Right.
One comment on that, if I may. We did spend some time talking about this one specifically, and my notes indicate that Chief Steele had some concerns about our ability to enforce changes in traffic laws, and that was one of his concerns in making that one of our top priorities.
And I think if I could jump in there too, my notes reflect the same, Megan, and that he believes it will pass this legislative session.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say based on a lot of the EMMC, LOC, they had this all lined up, teed up, and like Councilor Kellogg was saying, it passed. I mean, they just needed to get through the full process, and the legislature adjourned. It was a done deal because it took, 2 sessions to get this done, because the first time they had to tweak it a little bit. They made the changes that were required. So when they have time, I'm assuming this is going to come back and we're going to get that authority. And realistically, it only gives us 5 miles per hour of authority in certain areas. It's not throughout the whole city. So there's only certain streets and routes that we can do this on.
But I think 5 hours per hour is significant when it comes to 5 miles per hour, and when it comes to communities like residential areas and areas. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
I think it's going to happen. Given a short session or long session, it'll come back up because mayors all over the state are going to bring this back up. And since they had it across the finish line, and it's just a timing issue, like Councilor Kellogg just said, it'll pass. My feedback is I liked it the 4. And I remember way back when the last time we did this with Lou says, okay, they said 4, we can send 6, who cares? So my suggestion would be to take those 4, and then it sounds like people are okay with K and N, and just send LOC 6. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm saying yes, Maria.
All right.
I'm saying yes too, Nancy.
All right. Does that sound okay?
I think it's really important, especially because of the transportation issues we have in our area and the conversation. And there are a lot of other cities that might not quite be in the same kind of quagmire that we are. So taking a lead on that issue and coming up to speed on the other sounds like a good plan to me. Thanks.
Yeah. You know, a little pearl of wisdom from our former mayor. I stuck in my head and said, "We'll do what we want."
Having been on the other side of the table this time 2 years ago, it did not break the system when Tualatin submitted more than 4 priorities. So.
All right.
We're just expressing our home rule authority.
Our independence.
Roger that. All right, so I will plan on submitting the 4 priorities already identified and adding in K and N as top priorities.
Getting head nods. All right.
Perfect.
Thank
you very much.
Okay, so we scroll back up.
It was nice to have Megan as a part of the process this year on this side. She had so many insights onto the other side of it. So
yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Megan. All right, so we're up to our agenda review communications roundtable. Are there any questions on anything on consent tonight? Everybody's still smiling. I guess that's a no. All right. We have no proclamations. So I guess we'll go ahead into communications because we have an hour. This is great. We're ahead a little bit for once. So we'll start with Councilor Pratt.
I only have one thing. I was checking up on our elderly community and the Meals on Wheels people. They desperately need drivers. So if anybody's got spare time and the willingness, they could really use some drivers.
Right. Councilor Kellogg.
Wait, can I ask Councilor Pratt, do you know the process for doing that? Is just go on their website or?
I don't know the process. I would think it would be, and I know if you reached out to Susan Nowak, she could get you connected. So, and I could forward that email or find out. You know what I'll do? I'll find out the name of the person in charge of Meals on Wheels in our community and her information and forward that to council.
Okay, good.
All right. Councilor Kellogg.
Yeah, 2 quick items. First, I was just out at the food pantry before this meeting, donating some produce from Neighbors Nourishing Communities, and there was a long line of cars for the curbside pickup. So if you have the availability and capacity to volunteer out there or to donate some food, there is a great need to be met. Second, I got a call the other day from Craig Dirksen, our Metro counselor, now that they have put the transportation ballot or transportation measure on the ballot. They're out looking for endorsements. So if any of you are interested in signing on in support of the transportation bond, you can get in contact with Councilor Dirksen. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Paul.
Yeah, I have nothing today. It's been a slow couple of weeks. It was a C4 subcommittee, but they basically, I'm just looking over my notes here. Nothing really other than talking about the T2020 plan, which, as Councilor Kellogg mentioned, that was formally approved by the Metro Council and last week, and that's it.
All right. Thanks. Bridget.
I met with the Tualatin Arts Advisory Committee, and as usual, we had a very good meeting and want to thank all the participants on our committee. One of the focuses of the meeting was Ross Hoover getting feedback on updating parks planning to have a stronger DEI piece. And in doing so, I think he said he's going to 5 different committees to get feedback, since we don't have a consultant working on it or things like that, to get feedback from the community. So I just want to say that I applaud the leadership in rising to the moment. And I've gone to other meetings, but most of them are not committee meetings. We have the election season in full swing. I did go to the local leaders meeting with Representative Prusak, which I attend probably maybe every other week. And Councilor Morrison was there as well. And I find that meeting really helpful, talking to Representative Prusak, our school board members and leaders throughout the area, and other local city councilors and people, especially with a focus on the COVID issues that we're dealing with as cities. And it's a smaller meeting than some of the other ones, like the League of Cities. So I find it really helpful. And also it's a nice place to kind of brag about what we're doing here and share information, because we share ideas. So I just want to give a shout out again to Sherilyn and her team, because to be able to give some of those ideas and resources that our city is doing such a good job at, to share the information that we're getting, the money from the CARES Act and other monies to help with our situation and what we're thinking about. And not just making decisions in a bubble, but thinking things through with other people serving has been helpful. And anyway, so nice to see everybody.
All right. Councilor Reyes.
Well, it's been kind of quiet too on my end. All committees are kind of quiet for a little while, and so the MAC and all the other committees that I usually attend, or they're kind of just on hiatus right now. Not much going on. Yeah, in the last couple of weeks, it's been kind of quiet. So I have some committees that are coming up that are going to be interesting, but last 2 weeks, not much. So, thank you.
All right. Council President Grimes.
I have nothing to share at this point. I'm saving all of my thought and energy for the tolling conversation. So,
all right.
world.
Okay. All right. So leaves just me. Let's see. Still have meetings going on. So on July 16th, I attended the first Obama Foundation Mayor's Pledge Workshop. I sent you the notes of that meeting and the one handout. Then later that day, I just mentioned before earlier, attended the Modern Middle Housing Tour the HBA gave. Again, I sent you a link to it. It's about an hour long, because the Q&A at the end, you could probably skip on, just watch the meat of it, the first hour. That's where you're gonna find the gems. On the 22nd, attended the West Side Economic Alliance meeting. Big subject of discussion there is the Get Moving T 2020 ballot measure. They will be evaluating it and coming in their micro or their small committees and bringing it back to their board for a vote on whether to oppose, support, or stay neutral on the ballot measure. Both sides are pretty passionate, as you can imagine, and I look forward to that discussion. On the 23rd, we had our Metro Mayors Consortium meeting, where a big chunk of it was Metro President Peterson asking for the mayors to sign on to the letter asking President Trump to remove the federal troops from downtown. There's quite a bit of discussion. The mayors were in favor of the request, but of course, as all these folks get into the weeds about wording and lingo and want to wordsmith the letter. So it came down to, and I sent you all the link, that individual mayors and city councilors could sign on to the letter. I believe that window has closed because we were trying to get it out the next day or so. I did sign on to the letter. Also came up was during the consortium meeting, there's a serious concern, as it should be, alluding to what Councilor Brooks said earlier today. They're envisioning a 40% increase in homelessness due to COVID. And based on what we're seeing coming from the Senate Republicans, you're going to see a lot of people lose some benefits, especially that $400 per week. So there is a big concern for cities to get ahead of this rather than be behind it. So I look forward to our discussion or our next meeting about some funds, how we can assist in that. And then later that day was Greater Portland Inc. Greater Portland Inc. Remember, we're in the Small Cities Consortium. There's going to be a transition of leadership. The existing president or leader of GPI has accepted a position up in Washington. So they're going to be recruiting a new CEO, if you will, of GPI. But a big part of that discussion was the impacts on properties and businesses in downtown Portland right now with the continued demonstrations that I don't know how many people go downtown, but one example they gave is, you know, the McDonald's that's downtown Portland, been there for 40 years. They've pulled the plug. They're done. They're not coming back. And so a lot of the buildings around where the protests are occurring, those businesses are basically, they're done. They're finished. They're losing tenants galore. And a lot of the businesses in the downtown core are really seeing a downturn in people coming downtown, because some people don't know that most of this protest is confined to a 4-block radius and occurs at night. But the impacts are being felt in downtown, and GPI, I think rightfully so, says you want a vital downtown Portland because that's the attraction for the whole region. And we don't want to see that disappear. So they're working actively to try to resolve things with Mayor Wheeler, the Portland Police, and the feds to get this wrapped up and get downtown Portland back to normal. Also on the 23rd, I attended the second workshop from the Obama Foundation. I owe you my notes on that and a couple of handouts. I'll try to get that out in the next couple of days. And I capped that evening off with the In-N-Out Burger community meeting that was held. Per In-N-Out, about 70 people attended the webinar, or actually the Zoom meeting, but I'm assuming based on what I saw in the media the next day, a handful of those was media attending the In-N-Out Burger, not all just residents. And then finally, yeah, I'm also getting calls from Councilor Dirksen and Gonzalez asking for endorsements of the T2020. And I've gotten back to Juan Carlos, haven't got back to Craig yet on some of my thoughts and concerns, both pro and against, and see how we can resolve some questions I have before I make a commitment and endorse or not endorse. Because there are some things that need to be addressed that Metro didn't get to. Other than that, I think, let me make sure I didn't forget anything, because I have pages of notes here from these meetings. I think that's it.
Mayors, you are there meeting in these meetings, and I did attend the In-N-Out one, but it was
Good.
not. I think, have they thought about, and I don't know, I'm just throwing this out there because we're all kind of communicating, and I tried, but I don't know how to use my phone when to lift my hand. So have they thought about 99, somewhere where that area where we thought of developing the In-N-Out individuals, or, I mean, would that be, I mean, because most of the emails that I get from our community, from Tualatin, it's traffic issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, have we even proposed that there's some areas that might need traffic? Like not traffic as cars, but like human people that will go and buy, and will probably need something like In-N-Out to draw attention to that area. Kind of like where that 99 that we were talking about, the 99, it's 99 West, that kind of desolated area.
Yeah, I think they got their short list of properties where they'd like to locate. I mean, they mentioned they were
Okay.
looking at other places because we can't get too much into discussion of In-N-Out because we might end up talking about it in the future.
Right.
They had mentioned they're looking at Beaverton, Happy Valley, Oregon City, and Vancouver also. So they're looking to grow in this region. So I have an idea. They've got a short list of properties in each of those areas where they think a store will do very well for them. And that's what they're going to go with. And
Okay,
you know,
thank
like
you.
you mentioned, you saw we all got the emails about how
Yeah.
people felt about it, and I'm sure they did too. So they're aware how the community feels. Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I did forget about the In-N-Out Burger, and yes, I did attend the Zoom meeting, and I, like the rest of you, in addition to emails, have been flooded with resident feedback about the possible sighting of the In-N-Out Burger, and almost universally, at least for me at this point, as far as resident feedback, it's all been people with grave concerns about having one sited there, not just the traffic that it could bring, but also concerns about how that park and ride could evolve if we had something like that sited there. So I just thought I would mention that because that's been a huge topic of conversation.
I think we're all looking forward to see their application packet, the results of their meeting, the results of their traffic study, and we'll let the process roll out the way it's supposed to, so we don't irritate our city attorney.
Yeah. Yes, I just wanted to mention that I did do that.
So let me just jump in. I had a meeting today with Aquila and Steve and Aaron regarding just a debrief of the neighborhood developer meeting. So they said that there were 83 attendees at the neighborhood developer meeting. Nothing's a done deal. We have hired DKS traffic engineers to put together the scope of the traffic study. And we will give that to In-N-Out, and they will do their traffic study based on the scope that we provide them. And I presume there will be some negotiation back and forth because I'm sure they won't like the totality of the scope that we provide them. Then it will take some months until that traffic study and modeling is complete. The neighborhood developer meeting is good for 180 days, which is essentially 6 months. And if they go beyond that, then they have to hold another neighborhood developer meeting. So we expect it to go quiet for a while they're doing the traffic analysis, and then their traffic study they'll submit as a part of the application. So we won't see anything for a while.
And just for residents who might be listening and watching, they're keeping the window open for that email address for 10 days. So if you haven't sent an email yet and you still want to, the window's still open, but they did say after 10 days, they're shutting down that email address. So time is a clicking away if you want to send comments to In-N-Out Burger. All right, anything else? This is awesome. We got like a 40-minute break. All right. We'll go ahead and conclude the work session of July 27th. We'll go into recess and we'll reconvene for the Tualatin City Council meeting at 7 p.m. We'll see you then.
See you soon.